Hello and welcome to the CBB Super Show, the Tuesday night edition covering the Wednesday slate of games. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, doing my thing, talking about college hoops. Of course, we are brought to and powered by the FTN Network. We get it done. Do we have a better community than the FTN community? I do not think so. If you were here last night, we had a very in-depth discussion about how the industry continues to allow us to roster players against Syracuse that are going to play the high posts. Now, last time, against Notre Dame, the zone talk was, Jarkel Joyner was playing a lot of high posts, and he did. DJ Burns sure played a hell of a lot of high post. I thought that Jack Clark had a very solid chance to play tonight and play some high post as well, and he did. And Jack Clark went completely ballistic with 32 fantasy points. Jarkel Joyner at 6% in the mini-max goes for a triple-double, playing much of the high post. But also when Jack Clark was there, as I mentioned, it's not a big deal for Joyner because he's going to be able to step out and hit threes against his zone. What did he do? He stepped out and hit threes against the zone. What did he do? He rebounded against the zone. What did he do? He got assists against the zone. Shout out to Alex, the super NC State fan, for telling us to watch the Notre Dame game and see how that played out. Because I was really, really, really going to be heavily on Jack Clark, which I was anyways, and it worked out. But definitely shout out to him for getting us onto Joyner. Give me a Syracuse slate, and I will find you a player, whether it's through me, whether it's through my community, whether it's through somebody in the FTN Discord. We, not just me, we will find a low-owned player that completely breaks the slate open, melts it, destroys it, chews it up, spits it out, urinates on it. Just a phenomenal performance by Joyner, a great performance by Clark. They lose the game, whatever. If you ran that mini stack like we talked about and you played at least two of the NC State guys, hopefully you had Clark in there in some of your lineups. Jesse Edwards on the other side. Comically, Alex and I talking in DM earlier asked me what I thought Jesse Edwards' box score might look like. I did tell him, something like the following. Let me pull it up here. I have a lot of math. 18 to 20 real points, which he was right in there. 9 to 12 boards, which I was short on. I believe he had 16. A couple of assists, which he had, and combined 4 to 5 stocks, meaning steals and blocks, which he had. A phenomenal performance by Jesse Edwards as well. Big time performance by the St. John's guys, mainly David Jones and Joel Soriano. Just a lot of our guys hit. Really, really proud of the team, really proud of everyone at FTN and in the Discord, and those of you watching the show talking through the slate with us. Had a couple of Jalen Pickett shares. Auburn did well. Alan Flanagan had a pretty nice score. Tyrell Ward, who we had a lot of, ended up with right around 12 and a half fantasy points, which is fine at his price. It really was a solid day. Very good overall. Can't complain. The only things that really were missed upon, and it really no fault of our own other than the fact that there are trash coaches for these guys, and we should have made maybe a more of an account for this. But Cario Oquendo, who randomly will get these games where Mike White will just not play him, and he played 19 minutes tonight. I didn't see an injury of any kind. I was gone for a lot of tonight. It's Valentine's Day, got kids, got a lady, so couldn't pay attention as much as I would have wanted to. But the fact that he didn't play as many minutes as he would normally, that was pretty frustrating. Hold Mike White responsible for that. Also, Joe Bam, he didn't get the minutes that I was expecting him to get. As I said last night, we'll own the misses as well as pat ourselves on the back for the wins. Joe Bamsil didn't get the minutes for us. Otega didn't really do that well for Oklahoma either. Sherfield had a big game. but it didn't matter because Joey B was so cheap. He wouldn't have hurt you anyways if you got up to Pickett, got up to Edwards, you got in those NC State guys. It's just literally a cheat code of massive performance all season long. Every time Syracuse has been on the slate, we have used somebody that plays the high post, and the industry just continues to not play them. I don't know what it is, but they're just, allowing us to have these performances from guys. Next up for Syracuse, actually, we'll just go over their schedule right now because this is the cheat code. This is where we want to continue to push all our chips in because it is by far the best DVP spot. Michigan State up there, Penn State. Oh, by the way, Underwood for Illinois, add him to the shit coach list for next to Mike White. Playing Dane Danger under 20 minutes against Penn State when Dane Danger was on the floor. Imagine that. He scored over a fantasy point per minute. Not sure what the hell he was thinking there. Underwood is an idiot. Mike White is an idiot. They make Josh Pastner look like a astronomically high genius, and I'm just super frustrated about that. But I'm really happy about the calls that we made and happened. So the remaining schedule for Syracuse is as follows. Try not to unleash your you-know-what too fast when you hear these opponents. So Duke coming up this Saturday. Okay, so that's going to give us an opportunity for flip. I don't really play him too often, but he will absolutely be a strong play there going up against that Syracuse zone. Clemson next Wednesday. Oh, my God, Hunter Tyson, PJ Hall, come on, that's just going to be a fantastic spot all in there. Followed the following Saturday versus Pittsburgh, which is a really good, you would think a Blake Hinson spot, but Jamarius Burton had really torched them last time Pittsburgh had played against Syracuse. Hinson had a 25 and 13 game. Burton flirted with a triple-double, 9, 7, and 7. Continually, this is the spot to target. They also have a matchup coming up at the end of February against Georgia Tech, which that was the one that I was super uncomfortable with. Last time they played Syracuse, I kind of backed off there. It wasn't great for anyone. Dallin Coleman scored 17 real. That one will be some soul searching to be done. And then they end the regular season going up against Wake Forest, which is a great spot for Tyree Appleby. Clearly, great spot for Cam Hildreth to get back into our good graces. Just keep slamming the hell out of this matchup. It is phenomenal. Great teamwork by everyone. Syracuse slates continue to be the most profitable ever, and it's just not even close. And I just can't even believe it. I can't even believe it. I'm going to be watching that game tonight as I'm writing up tomorrow's slate, and just love Jarkel Joyner in the game that he had. Good game betting wise. Also New Mexico. Jalen House was available for emergencies only. Yikes! Losing on the home floor to Wyoming, that was rough. DK's offering single game prop parlays. We hit one of those for the Syracuse NC State game, so that was fun. Unfortunately, Oquendo crushed us because of the minutes not being there. Did hit Sean Gilbert over 20.5 PRA. That was one of our better ones of the night. Jarkel Joyner over 25.5 PRA. Tyler Wall, trash. Cario Oquendo, trash because of his coach. Dane Danger, trash because of his coach. Everything else hit, though. A very good night overall. Very, very happy with the results. A near miss, under 10 points, and your boy would have been in the bonanza, but wasn't meant to be. Unfortunately, the Cario Oquendo lack of minutes there really hurt that particular lineup, but feel good about the build otherwise. This particular lineup was Jarkel Joyner, KD Johnson, Caleb McConnell, who I mentioned last night. I was liking quite a bit. Derek Whitehead, Joel Soriano, Oquendo, unfortunately, and of course Tyrell Ward, who was right on par with what we thought he would score. All right, moving on to the slate for tomorrow, which is really what you want to talk about and get into. Before we do so, please make sure that you take a second and press the like button. Make sure you interact, whether you're watching live in the chat there or on demand, dropping comments. We do check those throughout the day. Make sure you're subscribed to the FTN channel so you don't miss not only the Super Show, but also the CBB betting show that takes place most mornings with our guy Mike Rando, who's a prodigy of sorts. Chris Meany, Mean Streets. He's got the flagship show there, and then every other little bit of content there that we do, whether it's off-season NFL stuff, MLB draft stuff coming up, WNBA stuff coming up. I've been talking a lot about the off-season moves of WNBA. That's going to be fun. XFL is coming up. The powers that be asking me if I'm going to play some XFL. Don't know if I'm going to have the time to really write/delve into that one. I would like to. I was looking at rosters last night, but this is the time where I'm hyper focused on college basketball. Not so sure I'm going to have time to adequately provide XFL content, but we'll see how that ends up working out. Next CBB Super Show is going to be Friday night at midnight EST. That one we will look to have a guest on. I know I said I was going to try for one for tonight, but I guess I didn't try that hard because it's just me again. Also, let me get to where you guys can hear me a little bit better, eh? Got so excited about that triple-double that I didn't even properly plug in my mic. Check. All right, so and then starting next week, I'm going to be doing Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, off Thursday. Then we'll do Friday, take Saturday, Sunday off to do some Discord grinding. But we're going to move to 4 shows per week starting next week. So be there, continue to support the content. Appreciate all of you guys. Hopefully you guys all had an opportunity to smash, crash, go nuts, get a little bit of sugar from the lady tonight, or the man, whatever it is that you prefer. And we will get going here on tonight's slate / tomorrow, depending on when you watch this. It is a intriguing slate, to be certain. Maybe not as high scoring as this one ended up being, but I always seem to say that. We'll see how it works out. It's an 11-game slate covering the DraftKings side of things. It does start a half an hour earlier than usual, so 6:30 Eastern instead of 7. Make sure you guys are able to set your lineups. Don't forget to get in there and do that 1/2 hour early. That sometimes catches people off guard, and they end up with a dead lineup before it even gets started. You don't want to have that happen. All right. As we get in here, and this is your first time watching, I appreciate it. What we do here is go game by game on the DFS side of things. I will provide you with a breakdown such as my favorite plays, anyone that I think will be popular, anyone that I'm, considering a sneak, give you some efficiency stats, talk about matchups, DVP, all that stuff. Give you a little bit of prize picks, props at the end. Tyler Wall got us tonight. Jarkel Joyner went off, but that wasn't enough for our power play to hit. And then, if there's a time at the end, there's usually not. I will bring up any props that I can see on the DraftKings side of things. We have trackers that we put up and for PrizePicks and the betting side. We also have a article that we put out each day for the slate breakdown, in addition to the Super Show, which is currently 3 times a week, but will be 4 starting next week. If you're a returner, thanks. Welcome back. Let's get into it. First game on the slate here is an SEC battle, Ole Miss versus Florida. Florida games have been a little bit of a nightmare, even though Mike White's not there anymore. For DFS purposes, we've seen Todd Golden run with a rotation that has never wavered with Colin Castleton, as it shouldn't, and Kyle Lofton. Earlier in the season, we saw a lot of Trey Bonham. We saw a lot of Kwesi Reeves. We saw my man Alex Fudge, who I still think has a ton of potential and upside. But now we're seeing a different starting lineup the last maybe month or so, which was definitely working in Florida's favor. They seem to be turning things around. But now they're on a 3-game losing streak, which includes an 8-point loss at home to Vanderbilt, which really can't happen. But it did, because Liam Robinson's a god right now. But their starting lineup that they're running now is Colin Castleton, Kyle Lofton as usual, Myron Jones, who is risen from the dead, Will Richard, and Riley Kugel, the freshman who has been a pretty solid value. Bench-wise, Kwesi Reeves, Alex Fudge, Trey Bonham, and Jason Jitoba. But the bench isn't really playing a whole lot of minutes besides Reeves and sometimes Fudge. On the Florida side, this is a matchup that's definitely advantageous. We can see that, there's some cheapies we want to target. Ole Miss defensively, they're a fantasy-friendly unit. I think, Q-Gale's price has gone up to 5.5, but he's still a fine play overall. He's definitely cheap enough to fit into a main lineup. I know I talk about how when those guys that are under 5K start to go over 5K, they don't appear to be as good of a value, but I still think that he's worth a look here. Back-to-back games over 24 fantasy points, which includes one against a very tough Alabama defense. He's taken a total of 27 shots in those 2 games, playing over 30 minutes. He's just, in Golden's good graces. He's Golden's guy. Looks like he's going to continue to play. They do have word that CJ Felder is back with the team, potentially going to play. Felder, of course, was kind of a semi-stud at times for Boston College a few years back. Hasn't really got acclimated to the SEC life, but any minutes out of him would at least make him somewhat interesting there at 3.2. Then we have Kwesi Reeves at 3.8. He has been a popular value in the past. We'll see him with games where he plays over 20 minutes and at this cheap 3.8 price, he'll probably end up being a little bit trendy. But we could very easily see him get rugged, play 8 to 10 minutes instead, and simply not pay off this 3.8 to 4K price. So I don't think this is one of those values that's a lock button like Tyrell Ward was. And again, Tyrell Ward got 12.5 fantasy points, but at 3.4, we're happy with that because it got us everything else that we needed in terms of Pickett, Edwards, NC State guys, whatever. Got to think of it like that. So at 4K or nearly 4K, if Reeves gets us 15 to 16, we're perfectly happy with that, of course. But you have to make sure you realize that the 20-plus minutes he's played in back-to-back games is far from a guarantee that will continue. So just prepare for that if you do go that route in your main lineup. Colin Castleton is over 10K now after being a really reasonable, lower 9K, upper 8K price for a lot of this season. But he is just after, going through a January where he wasn't taking double-digit shots and was very passive. This switch in the lineup has really led to Colin Castleton taking more of a high usage role on the offensive end, 48 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games. Unfortunately, it hasn't led to any victories for Florida, but Castleton is playing out of his mind right now. 29-10 against Bama, 25-11 against Vanderbilt. Everybody else in the Gators has a problem, not Castleton. So at 10-3 against an Ole Miss front court that is very susceptible to opposing bigs, just cream corning them to death. We're looking at a group here that runs a 6'8" Robert Allen at center. Sometimes Jermaine Brakefield, who's like 6'7", 6'8", he's got to be asked to play the 5. JVS McGinnis, he's 6'6", 6'7". He's asked to play the center. They do have Theo Okubwa, who's almost 7 feet, but he's so kind of even as a senior, he's pretty raw offensively, and he's not very disciplined on the defensive side either, and they can't really play him big minutes, although they probably will need to against Castleton, or else he might run roughshod against them. But this is a very undersized Ole Miss team that's probably going to struggle quite a bit handling a guy like Colin Castleton. So if you want to pay that upper tier price, I have no problem with it. He's got phenomenal rates, 28.4% usage rate, 26.1% shot rate, a 20% defensive rebounding rate, a 20% assist rate, 9.5% block rate, drawing 6 fouls per 40. Colin Castleton wants your love, deserves your love. Valentine's Day special. Go ahead and pay some for Colin Castleton. Get him into some of your lineups because I think he's going to play phenomenally well. Kyle Lofton, who we continued to shutter and stick in our lineups at 4.7 and 4K, and he was putting up 12. He's also playing much better. 6K is too rich for my blood. If Mike were here, I would ask him if he thought he would be using him because he's definitely one of Kutri's guys, playing big minutes, facilitating the offense, looking a lot more like the St. Bonaventure version of Kyle Lofton. Definitely in play, but I'm a little uncomfortable with just how high priced he actually is. And Myron Jones, every time I think that, I want to back off or I'm not going to jump on because I haven't used them. I missed my shot and the prices was getting so high. He continued to churn out good games, 20 plus against Tennessee, but the doors have kind of fallen off a little bit, and his minutes have started to dwindle a little bit as well, as Vanderbilt and Bama both were able to keep him in check. So sitting there at 5-4, might we see, Myron Jones start to regress back? Might we see Alex Fudge start to get more minutes? Trey Bonham perhaps, but at the end of the day, if Jones is going to struggle or at least split with Kwesi Reeves, that makes Reeves relatively safer than maybe I am prepared to admit, because a 20-minute split with Jones is definitely makes Reeves interesting, not so much on Jones. And that's pretty much it, I think, for Florida. Richard at 6'3", is priced where he should be. Bonham's damn near min price, but the minutes aren't there. Alex Fudge at 4'3", he's a good throwaway GBP look. But let's go over to the Ole Miss side here. We have some cheapies. Ty Fagan is near min price, but another guy that can we really bring ourselves to trust. Ty Fagan has been in the SEC for a long time, various other teams. I don't want to get sucked into using too much Ty Fagan here. Against Georgia, softer opponent, 23 minutes, 15 fantasy points. Against South Carolina, softer opponent, 28 minutes, 23 fantasy points. I don't know that I'm buying this, because when we roll back the clock a little bit, just to the end of January, not too far, just about a week or two ago, against Missouri, 27 minutes, 21 fantasy points, and against Oklahoma State, 21 minutes. Didn't play very well, 6 fantasy points, but 21 minutes. Follows that up with a game against Kentucky where he plays 4 minutes, and then against Vanderbilt where he plays 4 minutes. So we have a coach here in Coach Kermit that is jacking us around on minutes on various players, and it's tough to sit here and for me to say, yeah, Ty Fagan is going to be a lock. I think people are going to flock to Kwesi Reeves. I think they're going to flock to Ty Fagan, and I'm very, very suspicious of those two being in main lineups together, let alone, even alone. So tread very carefully there. Let everyone else kind of go that route and see if we can unearth some other values that we can use that are maybe a little bit, not just sneaky, but a little more fundamentally sound. How about that? I do have interest in Robert Allen at 4'6" at the very least. He's a guy that, like I just mentioned, undersized, playing D5. He has 21 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. That's against the likes of Kentucky, which, he held his own. He didn't get into too much foul trouble going against Oscar. Vanderbilt, he struggled a little bit, had 13 and 16 minutes going against Liam Robbins. Georgia, he had 4, 6, and 5, which is really strong. And then South Carolina took 11 shots against that South Carolina front court. That's actually really good on the glass with Josh Gray, who had another 12 rebounds tonight, by the way. But he held his own, 10.7 rebounds in that one. The concern here would be foul trouble going up against Castleton, because Castleton is so gifted at drawing fouls. But I think with Allen, even though he's trending closer to the 5K price, he is the value in this game above Kwesi Reeves, above Ty Fagan, that if you ask me who in this game can I use for my main lineup that's not named Colin Castleton and is under 5K, I will direct you towards Robert Allen here, because I think that he's just one of the better plays even on the road for this Ole Miss team. And there's a lot of uncertainty with this team. TJ Caldwell, 30 minutes, then he goes down to 13, even though he's been really good. It's just hard to really trust some of these guys and what Coach Kermit is actually doing with them. So just tread lightly. I'm not going to guarantee Ty Fagan's going to play like 5 minutes, but I think it's better than 50% chance that he plays under 10 minutes tomorrow. I really have been liking Matthew Morrell, even though he was bad last game. Under 7K, he's been a pretty big smash returning back. We know that, he's a high usage, high shot rate player. With Deshaun Ruffin stepping away from the program, that gives him an opportunity to push his shot rate and usage rate even higher. And you look at the last couple of games that he's been back since he returned after missing 3 straight games, 28 minutes, 24% usage rate against Vandy, 34 minutes back into the starting lineup there against Georgia, 26% usage rate, and then South Carolina, 35 minutes, but only a 17% usage rate. He was fouled out in those 35 minutes, and South Carolina really did a good job of cuffing him and keeping him from getting too comfortable. When he's at his best is when he's getting to the foul line, initiating contact, and getting those easy points there. So he's still fine, I think, at 7K. It's only a couple hundred more than what he has been. typically looking at him as a GPP guy playing a lot of minutes there without Day Ruffin. All right. Jermaine Brakefield at 7K. The other, what was it, the Georgia slate, I think it was, somebody asked me about a last minute in for him, but at 6'9", I said, hell no. And, of course, he puts up a 40 there. He's been really solid the last couple of games, 5 straight over 21 fantasy points. He's another one that I'm highly suspicious of this continuing. He's just playing so well, but the opponents have been definitely lesser tier. A Kentucky team that is by no means even guaranteed to make the tournament this year. They've been pretty soft. Vanderbilt, Georgia, South Carolina, but he's beating up on the bottom of the barrel SEC teams. Now he's going up against a Florida team that's not that much better than the bottom of the barrel, but they're at least more competitive on a daily basis or a game-by-game basis than teams like South Carolina and Vanderbilt. So I'm, like I said, very highly suspicious of Jermaine Brakefield. I do not think he's paying off his 7K price. Miles Burns, same thing, 6'5". I could take it or leave it with him. He has been a really strong, undersized guy as well, but he rebounds at a high clip. You saw him put up 20 and 6 against Georgia. He's been over 20 fantasy points in 6 of his last 7. But again, 6'5", you can kind of take it or leave it with that price. All right. Checking the chat here. Adam says, has there ever been an uglier slate? Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Iowa State, ugly environments along with IU and Northwestern, Arkansas, Texas A&M, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Xavier, Marquette for the win. Yeah. Lower scoring slates tend to be right in my wheelhouse, so I like it. Give me those 220s to bank. Speaking of which, Tennessee versus Alabama is the next game on the slate. Very, very difficult to get too excited. We're dealing with 2 defenses that are not only basically the best in the SEC, but the best in the whole world. Tennessee, of course, number 1 in defensive efficiency per KenPom. Alabama is 5th. The difference here, Alabama plays at the 2nd highest tempo in the country. They also have the 13th best offensive efficiency, while Tennessee plays very, very slow, 250th. Offensively, they're right around 49 to 50th there. Tennessee's offense is very stagnant. I'm actually surprised they're even rated 50th because there are times where they really struggle to score. I know the last game against Missouri in which they lost, they scored 85 points. Scoring 85 and losing, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. But I think at the end of the day, Santiago Vescovi's just not a good enough alpha to lead this Vols team. Zakai Zeigler deserves a really big round of applause for how good he stepped up his game as a sophomore. He's good enough to carry this team at times, but he's still a little bit raw. He needs a partner. He's kind of an Emoja Gibson type to me. Maybe not Emoja Gibson light, but like Emoja Gibson max. Like he's better than Emoja as a high-level role player / he can carry a team once in a while, but not on a consistent basis. He needs to have somebody else on this team that can carry. And Vescovi's just not that guy. Julian Phillips is still too raw. Jonas Idu, Jamal Mashak, still too raw. Tyreek Key, who had a nice game shooting the basketball, 5 for 9 from deep in their last game, kind of struggles. I don't suspect him being playable against Alabama. I will still continue to respect this Alabama defense, which really kind of puts me off of any of the Vols guys at all. I will continue to say the Vols have cost me over the last 3 seasons some money betting in the tournament because I always end up picking them to go in the second weekend or beyond. They're falling apart earlier this year, which I appreciate because I'm not that tempted and won't be putting that much money on them in the tournament. So Tyreek Key at 4-4 coming off a big game. If people want to chase that, I'm perfectly fine. That's another one kind of like Fagan and Reeves that I'll be underweight on. I just don't believe that he's going to do that against this Alabama defense. There's just no way that I see that happening. I do sitting there as a starter, at 4-2 with Triple J, again, dealing with some issues. This time he's a game time decision, got a hip, a severe hip pointer. Julian Phillips, who I was just talking about, he's also dealing with an issue, a lower body issue is what I've been hearing on him. So there's a couple of opportunities here for Idu to see additional minutes with those injuries. We saw him play 20 in the last game. He's actually played 18 plus in 2 of his last 3, but still a lower end option overall. You also have the opportunity to play Toba Awaka, who is going to be a very solid player, I believe, next year. Once the Plavsic's off the team and some of these other guys move on, Toba's actually got a lot of upside. 15 plus minutes in 3 straight, very high rebounding rate. He's had 9, 4, and 7 in the 3 games he's played accelerated minutes. 4 rebounds, 8 fantasy points, 22 and 17. So at 3-7. If we get, and it's in one of the first games, so that's great. If he ends up being a situation where there's 2 guys out for Tennessee, I have no problem playing Tobe in your main just because of that sub 4K price. And I really like looking at his rates. Usage rate of almost 20%, shot rate of almost 20%. His rebounding rates are insanely high. Now, granted, it's a very limited minutes and when you come in and play like just a couple minutes and grab a bunch of rebounds and or just lesser minutes in general, it causes sometimes your efficiency stats to be skewed. But when you look at it, he has a 43% combined rebounding rate, over 20% on the offensive rebounding side, over 20% on the defensive rebounding side, a block rate of 5%. Lot of potential for this freshman to end up being a big-time player. So I am walking back a little bit on not playing anyone against Alabama, and that Toba Awaka at 3-7 has a major appeal to me depending on how the injury news shakes up. On the Alabama side, they're also got guys dealing with issues. Charles Bediako has some sort of knee injury. Bediako was just starting to play better. Fouls are usually the issue for him, but his minutes were trending upward again. Against Auburn, he looked really good. Against Florida, he looked very good. He's had 6 blocks in 2 games, sitting there at 4.9. Even against Tennessee, I would have had some major interest for GPP side of things for Bediako, but a knee issue making him questionable is obviously a big concern. Other Alabama guys, the prices are they're fair, right? So Mark Sears at 6.9, I think in a better matchup, that's probably a slam type price, but here against Tennessee on the road, not so much. I do feel like this one, even though Bama's, coming into it playing at a faster pace, Tennessee at home, they're going to want to slow the game down. And I don't see Bama asserting their will quite as much. I think this one's going to be a little bit of a lower scoring affair. So Brandon Miller at 9.4 naturally becomes less of a priority play as well. Still like to have a couple of shares of Brandon Miller just because he's pretty much matchup proof, but that is a steep price to pay for someone that if he hits 32, still not really at value. Now we still have values for Alabama in that guard spot. Jaden Bradley 4.1, Namari Burnett 3.6, Rylan Griffin 4.2, Javon Quinterly at 4.5. So there's cheapies here on Bama as well. If you depending on how you want to attack, let's look at the last couple of games, and we'll start with the game against Auburn, which was a 77-69 victory. Rylan Griffin off the bench, 21 minutes, hit 3 triples, 16 points, 2 rebounds, 2 block shots. So he was the value that popped there. Javon Quinterly went back to barely playing, only 11 minutes. Namari Burnett had a actually pretty solid 5 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists game in his 17 minutes. 30% usage rate for Burnett. I think he's a very sneaky / solid 3-6 option. And you guys are getting tired of me with the Caleb Murphys and the Joe Bamasil and the Mari Burnett's, but you got to look at these guys, what their rates are, their potential minutes, and the overall talent, and it just doesn't make sense for them to be so cheap. However, Caleb Murphy is officially cooked. I did tweet that before the show. Getting multiple overtime game and plays 12 minutes, I think it was. Done. He's cooked. So that's unfortunate. But Namari Burnett is not cooked. He's healthy. I think we see him kind of push maybe towards 20 minutes. I think Quinterly goes this way. I think Burnett goes this way. Jaden Bradley still starting as the freshman. He had 12 points, 1 rebound, 2 assists, played 22 minutes. So we're basically looking at a pool of minutes here that is 60-ish amongst those 4. And we're probably going to continue to see a split with the primary 2, which at this point it's Bradley Griffin. Could very easily be Bradley Burnett. It was Burnett the other day. It's been Quinterly sometimes. And then we're starting to see Rylan Griffin kind of pop off. Now let's look at their rates. Javon Quinterly, of course, has the highest usage rate on the team at 24%, highest shot rate, or second highest shot rate at 24%, and assist rate of 34.5%, shooting 35% from long range. So his rates are phenomenal. It's just he has a tendency to be a turnover machine, disappear in key moments, and the minutes just are never consistent when it comes to Quinterly. Jaden Bradley, 22% usage rate, shooting 32% from long range, 27.5% assist rate. He is going to be very, very good in the near future. Rylan Griffin, one of the higher offensive ratings on the team. He has a shot rate of 23.3%. He's shooting 35% from long range. He does, in SEC play at least, starting to trend way, way up. He has the 9th best offensive rating in the SEC, the 8th best mark from long range in the SEC games at 41.2%. So he's very, very, very solid as well. The Rylan Griffin shares are definitely something that I want to have. And then, of course, Namari Burnett, who comes with a high pedigree, a very solid upside when given the minutes. Looking at it, 20% shot rate, 20% usage rate. He does have a block and steal rate over 1%, shooting 34% from long range. He's jacked up 55 shots from long range, despite playing less games than most everybody else. It shows you the usage rate is high there. Since he's been back, so what he played and started the first month and a half of the season, and then missed a bunch of games all throughout the end of December and into January. So you throw away the Missouri and Mississippi State games because he played a combined 6 minutes. They just wanted to get him, a little bit of game action, start to figure it out. He has played in the last 5 games, 14 or more minutes. And during that time, he has had a usage rate of at least 15% in all but one. The Oklahoma game, he played 14 minutes. He had a bunch of fouls. He pretty much was standing around. So they gave him more minutes. That was his 3rd game back. But he still was clearly not up to par with his conditioning, still very rusty. It wasn't until the next game, a couple of days later against Vanderbilt, when his usage rate spiked all the way up to 26%. He made 4 threes, 16 real points, 4 rebounds, a very solid outing there in 15 minutes. Then against LSU, which was the game I jumped aboard, 21 minutes, 28% usage rate, 13 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. Had a rough outing against Florida, but the minutes were still there, and then spiked back up to 17 minutes and a 29% usage rate against Auburn. You're seeing he is doing better in matchups that are maybe a little quicker. This may not be the spot for him because of this matchup against Tennessee. I think is not going to fit his play style very well. So I do feel like I'm not going to be as reckless as maybe as I'm on some of these other guys like Bama Seal and whatever. But he's definitely a viable candidate for your lineup at 3.6 because of how cheap he is. And if those minutes hit anywhere close to 20, he can absolutely pay off. All right, enough about this trash-ash game. Let's move on to a more exciting one, which is Xavier versus Marquette. This is definitely one that is going to, I think, be popular. Stacking, we said NC State, Syracuse, stacking up maybe a little bit of Auburn, although Missouri was awful today. Sean East did well. My man Sean East had 14 real. That wasn't bad. This is one that you want to definitely look to stack. There are so many playable options here. Price-wise, it's not going to be easy to fit, but I think we can definitely make it happen. Looking at the pay-ups on this slate, let me pull it up. TJD at almost 12K against the tough Northwestern D. Colin Castleton, Oscar Tshiebwe. Tshiebwe continues to really not impress. I think the industry is starting to pull away from him a little bit. Brandon Miller, we know, I just talked about him. Matthew Cleveland, who over 9K feels a bit high. Grant Basile, who has been phenomenal for me personally, up to 9-1. Then you get down here to Jack Nunge at 8-9. So they're really, aside from Basile above Nunge, there's nobody except, maybe Castleton that I feel like we need to play over a guy like Jack Nunge in this spot on the road against Marquette. So we can definitely make this work, and I think a Xavier mini stack makes a lot of sense. And we already know Zach Fremantle is out. That's done. We know that, nothing new. But we're also seeing Sully Boom with an ankle issue. Now, he's expected to play. Xavier's rotation is already extremely short. If Sully Boom was to be out, they would have to unleash Kai Tandy, which I don't know if that's going to work out. But the main thing here is that an ankle issue like that can definitely linger. I think he'll be out there, but he'll be less attacking. He's going to defer more. We're going to see a far less effective Sully Boom. This is where we want to turn our attentions to Jack Nungy, who at 8-9, it's a high price, but we've seen him pop off for 50 plus. This is going to be a game where he takes literally 15 plus shots. He had 44 against Marquette the first. He'll go around 16 and 13. He got to the foul line 9 times, hit 6 of those. Just a very good outing. Marquette's front court is very soft as well. Colby Jones at 8-8, who a lot of people just end up ignoring. He's kind of like Devin Carter of Providence. He keeps on hitting these 30 fantasy point games. By the way, Devin Carter hit 30 again. Go figure. But Colby Jones in that same kind of mold. People don't think he has the upside. They don't want to pay this high price for him. He also had a very workman-like 13, 8, and 5 against Marquette for 35.5 fantasy points. With Boom, ailing, we could see Jones with the ball in his hand a lot more, 12-plus shots. He's very much in play as well. And then you go down here and you've got Adam Kunkel at 6'2", which he's intriguing with a limited Boom because he'll initiate the offense a little bit more. He scored 20-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. Then you have Jerome Hunter, whose price continues to climb. He's up to 6-1 now, but again, a solid option here against Marquette. I would probably back off slightly. I know that he's had a very high fantasy point per minute number, and as long as he keeps himself out of foul trouble, he's been performing. So I think that we'll see people continue to play him, but I'm going all the way to the top with Xavier, with Nungy and Colby Jones. Now, Desmond Cloud at 4-4 is still in play, and if the unthinkable happens and Sully Boom doesn't go, then Claude becomes almost a 90% lock button type of play, and you don't want to have many lineups without him. With Boom, even a limited Boom, he's just kind of an okay option overall. He played 19 minutes against Marquette, but he didn't do a whole lot there, and he's 4-4, so we're not getting that min-price look that we had before. But between Nunge and Colby Jones, I'm going to have a lot of those guys in this spot here. Marquette side of things, also a great spot. Xavier has been a very fantasy-friendly defense. We're seeing them give up just huge amounts of fantasy points. We're seeing Xavier games be popular too. Xavier Butler game was like super stacked. We saw so much ownership from that game on Friday, and Xavier underwhelmed. I would suspect here in a better spot against Marquette that we see a lot of ownership there. Ken Palm has this one 87-81 for Xavier, so we're talking about possibly touching 90-plus points here for an individual team. Let's bring up the box score from the last time they faced at the Cintas Center. They're playing Ed Marquette this time, but 80-76 victory for Xavier. Like I said, Nungy had a great game. Colby Jones had a great game. Boom had 16, 6, and 5. Jerome Hunter off the bench had 11 and 4. But on the Marquette side, it was Tyler Kolek who had a monster game, 25, 4, and 7 with a 30% usage rate. Cam Jones, 12, 2, and 5, wasn't great. Maxence Prosper was just okay. Oso Ighodaro, 14 and 8. And then this was the game that David Joplin had a lot of shots up. He had 11 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, and a block. An adequate game, but a usage rate over 26%. Very interesting. If his minutes start to spike in a matchup like this, he could definitely perform. But Tyler Kolek at 8K, you have to get over that. I have to get over the fact that that's a high price because he's just a really good option on this Marquette team. He's carrying them. He contributes in all categories, and he will thrive and flourish in this type of atmosphere against Xavier. Oso Ighodaro, same thing, 7-3. I think he's a strong play. You do have Chase Ross, who has been at least an interesting value. He's sitting there at 4-3. Looking at the last Marquette game, let me pull it up here because there's a couple of guys that we can speculate on. Ross played 21 minutes. He's actually been playing quite a bit. 21, 18, 24, 17, 17, 24 over his last 5 to 6 games. So they clearly Shaka trust Chase Ross to play more and more. The last game there, the other freshman, Sean Jones, who's back against Georgetown, he played 20 minutes. Ben Gold The other freshman, he played 14. So you have some intriguing options here to look. I think, Chase Ross plays about 20 to 22 minutes. Sean Jones maybe touches 19 to 20 here as well. I do like Sean Jones quite a bit. I think I was a little too early on him about maybe 3 weeks ago. His minutes went way down after he was trending upwards, and Shaka was just gushing about how Sean Jones defense this and Sean Jones is a key playmaker here. So I really thought we were onto something, but it wasn't quite there. He did have a very solid outing against UConn, 19 minutes where he had 11 points, 2 assists on his way to 15 fantasy points. I think he's a very solid guy at 3.5 that you want to have in your tournament exposures, whereas in Maine, Chase Ross makes a little bit more sense, I think, overall. Cam Jones, a GPP play under 7K. Nobody's going to be on him. He's dealing with various issues. He's going through a bit of a shooting slump, although last game he shot much better against Georgetown, 50% from the field, 44% from long range. But he has been slumping a bit lately, and that's why the price has fallen and why I think nobody will use him. Definitely want to have a little bit of exposure there. Corey's Gym. What's up, man? The Arkansas superfan has arrived. Go figure, man. How are you, Corey? Hope all is well. Should have known you'd come out of the woodwork here for the Arkansas slate. Nick Smith coming back into play. We'll see. We'll talk about him in a second, but good to see you. I haven't given you a hog call this season, but come tournament time, maybe we'll have to make a bet where that happens. All right, next game on the slate is Florida State versus Clemson. This is one on the Florida State side that I can live without, honestly. And, man, Matthew Cleveland, just a little too high price for me. Chandler Jackson, who's sitting there at 4-1, was a popular play coming off of his solid game where he started. The Florida State, as they get healthier, the rotation grows. Leonard Hamilton, specialist to play as many players as possible. He goes from starting Chandler Jackson to playing him only 10 minutes last game. So very, very strange. We are looking at a likely starting group of Darren Green, Matthew Cleveland, Jalen Worley again, who went really ham against Pittsburgh, Caleb Mills, and Cameron Corhen. Corhen was bounced back after a pretty abysmal game. He was very solid. Naheem McLeod, who had a very strong game 2 games ago, back to doing very little, only 13 minutes. And then our guy, Baba Miller, who played 19 minutes. So he did get that 20-minute threshold that I'm looking for with him, but he only took 3 shots. He had 3 rebounds. He had a block. He was very passive. His usage rate was only 9%. We got to see more out of Baba. We need to see more minutes. So then you might look at the Jacksons of the world at 4-1, the McLeods at 4-2. Really not that exciting. Or even Jalen Worley. You might say, well, Worley's back playing a lot of minutes, starting. He played 30 minutes. He's going to be a lock button value at 4-6. Just be careful. We could very easily see him not start. They put in, Chandler Jackson, or Worley plays 2 minutes, gets yanked, and then Jackson plays 35. Hamilton is getting more weapons at his disposal, and this is when he's at his most dangerous to the DFS community, is when he has options at his disposal. So tread lightly here. The only thing that I can say with any certainty is that Baba Miller is sitting there at 3.6, and while he's failed to register double-digit fantasy points in 3 straight games, he's still an uber-talented kid. He's going to be in the NBA. He has the skill set to do so. This FSU or this Clemson matchup is not great, but he did have one of his best games, actually probably his best game of the year, against this Clemson team at home back on the 28th of January. This was when he hit 17 fantasy points, 11, 4, and 1, took 7 shots. So they need Miller to step up to have some respectability and make, the unlikely run in the conference tournament the only way they're going to dance. But they need to see Miller contribute more, and he needs to be playing roughly 18 to 22 minutes with regularity. So I will still have some rostership to Baba Miller, of course. Clemson, always interested in Hunter Tyson. Always interested in PJ Hall, Chase Hunter. They have this trio of fantastic options on this Clemson team. We've seen RJ Godfrey start to assert himself a little bit, although he's not quite to main team level right now, just a GPP value. And then, of course, Brevin Galloway sitting there at 5.3. All of those guys on Clemson are at least interesting. Hunter Tyson, 8.4. I know it's a high price. He did get punked a little bit against North Carolina. They got their doors blown off. But before that, pretty consistent source of 30-plus fantasy points. He had 42 against Florida State last time in an 82-80 win. Played 40 minutes, took 17 shots, 27-7. Look for Hunter Tyson to bounce back in a big way with very, very little ownership, in my opinion. PJ Hall, the more popular play, I think, if people are going to go to Clemson. He has a very solid 25 to 30 fantasy point floor, had 35 against FSU in their last outing. Ridiculously good, crafty player that people tend to overlook. If you can afford the 400 more for Tyson, I actually prefer that, even though I'm a big PJ Hall truther. But at the end of the day, I'm fine with using either of them here in this spot. Chase Hunter is a main team type of play at 6.2. He's playing over 30 minutes, has taken double-digit shots in each of the last 5 games, and it goes further back than that as well. He has had 27-plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 4. So you can look to him as well. Then you have Brevin Galloway playing 25 to 30 minutes at 5.3. Obviously, the fourth Beetle most nights, but he's definitely getting shots up. He's taken 8+ shots in 3 straight games, taken 14 threes, made 5 of them, and he has been a reliable scorer as a role player, and he suits that pretty well. So 5.3 is just a cheap enough price to get me enough interested in him that I'll certainly have a little bit of exposure and kind of splash around these Clemson guys and maybe perhaps just rotate through them. But main team, I'm really looking to a guy like Hunter Tyson if I can get there. And I think I can. Looking at rates here, if you're not sold on the Clemson conglomerate of the world, you should be. I know that Brad Reynolds starting to fall apart here, much like Rick Barnes, 3 straight losses, but they still have a very solid team. Hunter Tyson, 22% shot rate, 20% usage rate, a combined rebounding rate of 32%, shooting 44% from long range, so he can bang down low and shoot threes. PJ Hall, of course, 32% shot rate, 38% from long range, 5% block rate, 18% defensive rebounding rate, drawing 5.5 fouls per 40. And then you have Chase Hunter, 26% usage rate, 27% shot rate, 35% from long range, 5 fouls per 40, and an assist rate of 26.1%. So some really strong rates for these Clemson guys. Clemson's rotation, it can be intimidating, I think, sometimes because you see they'll go into, spot 9 or 10, but minutes aren't there. We're talking like 4 to 8 minutes for a lot of those guys. Pretty much the core 4 of this group, Hunter, Tyson, Galloway, and Hall, are all going to play 25-plus minutes. Hemingway, Godfrey, Middlebrick kind of rotating through that 5th spot. And then Beetle, Dylan Hunter, and Chauncey Wiggins will get, garbage minutes. They're a pretty young team, honestly. There's a ton of freshmen on this team between Godfrey, Wiggins, Beetle, and Hunter, so that's their future. Schiffelin's still a sophomore. Hall's still, a junior. He's got years left. Chase Hunter's a junior. COVID junior at that, so that's 2 years left. It's only really Hunter Tyson and Brevin Galloway possibly that they're going to lose, and Hemingway. So I think what Brownell is trying to do, and which is smart, is get these young guys some additional playing time so that they don't come into it, feeling completely overwhelmed. And you never know, and they're one injury away from being called upon. All right, so that game I definitely like and think is much stronger than people probably will give it credit for. Obviously, I'm geared and leveraged a lot more towards the Clemson side of things. But if I want an FSU run back, it's Baba Miller. Ba Miller all the time. My son is very into Baba Miller, I'll have you know. Although I think he's asking for a different kind of Baba, but I just imagine that he's telling me to play Baba Miller. So we'll see what he thinks in the morning. But I have a feeling he's going to be talking about him. All right, moving on to the next game here, Virginia versus Louisville. Not Illinois again. God, please, not any more Illinois slates. Tap. Scott, Illinois coaching staff, The worst. The worst. Please get rid of Underwood as soon as possible. SDP Solutions, where firing Underwood is not just a pipe dream. Virginia is in a weird spot because I don't believe in worrying about blowouts in college basketball too much. And I don't like to let that affect who I play. The problem here is Louisville is so atrocious in all categories, defensively, offensively, turnover rate, piss poor three-point defense, piss poor block rate. They get a ton of their shots blocked. They get the ball literally at this point. It's like they're holding the ball out and saying, here you go, take it away from me. It's just a bloodbath waiting to happen each and every time they're on the floor. It's not been an easy season. 3-22 is not what people envisioned when Kenny Payne got here, and the recruiting class gutted. I don't know that next year is going to be very good for Louisville either. And unless they pull a Forbes and hit the transfer portal correctly, we might not see Payne last too long, unfortunately. But this game against Virginia, it's a horrible matchup for them. I don't know that they'll even score 50 real points. They are at home. They end their season on the road against Virginia, which they might not score 30 in that setting. So with that being said, I shy away from getting too crazy with Virginia. I'm always looking to use my man Reese Beekman, who is affordable at 6'7", coming off 3 straight games of 29-plus fantasy points, and that's against the likes of Virginia Tech, NC State, and Duke. No pushovers by any means, except Duke. That team sucks. But I definitely think Beekman can pan out. My problem with Beekman is he's typically passive. In these type of situations, I don't know he'll be looking for his offense. It is encouraging, though. He's taken 33 total shots in 3 straight games. So a combined 33 shots. Sorry, not in 3 straight, but 33 total shots in 3 games. That would be awesome if he took 33 each per game. But 11 total in each of the last 3 games. So he's looking for a shot more. 5 for 11 against VTech. 6 for 11 against the Wolfpack, 2 for 11 against Duke in that game that they gutted out in the extra period. In that one, he only had 4 points, but he contributed 3 steals, 7 assists, 1 block, 6 rebounds. And that's what we're looking for in Beekman. I'm only ever really wanting him to, obviously I want him to score a lot, but my expectation for him is 8 to 10 real points, and then his peripherals will take care of the rest. So at 6'7", I think he is definitely a reasonable play. It's just that if this turns into a major blowout, they will let their foot off the gas, and Beekman will just be really passive. That's my main concern. There hasn't been a ton of blowouts lately for them necessarily. So he's been playing, 30-plus minutes pretty regularly. You have to go back to like the non-con to see when he didn't. So I don't have a lot to compare to there, but we've seen him play passively, and that's the problem that I would have with maybe using him in my main. And it corresponds to the breakout that Armand Franklin had, the mid to late January, where he was scoring 30-plus fantasy points with regularity. He kind of fell off for 3 straight under 20, got back to business against Duke, hit 9 of 13, but his decline really coincided with the fact that Beekman's shot taking started going up, and he looked to take more shots. And I think they finally got through to him a little bit about that. So hopefully it continues. Franklin won't be using him at the 6'6" price, but his presence and his shooting ability definitely makes things easier for Beekman because it gives him opportunities to rack up assists as well. I think 6'9" for Kihei Clark is unreasonable. I think, his price has gone down, which may attract some. But I don't know at this point if I can be considered a Kihei Clark hater. He just doesn't move the needle for me. Rarely does he move the needle for me. I didn't really play him back 2-3 years ago when he was 4'7" and everybody had to have him. Certainly not playing him here at 6'9". Jaden Gardner at 6'6". I think we have to at least consider him for some exposure. He has a very nice matchup against this Louisville team. He's a very inconsistent producer. We saw against Duke, he fell on his face. But to close out January and even into early February, he really went on this 4 or 5 game streak where he was completely unstoppable. So that type of Gardner definitely looms, and a matchup with Louisville is just what the doctor ordered, but we're not getting a very good discount on him at all. Then you have Vander Plas, who after barely, he was playing 30 minutes, smashing. Then he went back down to barely playing for a game or two, and then back up to 30 against Duke, which he had 30 fantasy points. I think Vander Plas is a very intriguing play overall. If he sees 30 minutes here against this Louisville team, he's absolutely got the rates to produce a 19.5% shot rate, shooting 32% from long range. He has a defensive rebounding rate of 19%. So I think Vander Plas at 5'3" is a solid overall look himself. We had some value in guys like Isaac McNeely, Ryan Dunn, all starting to see their minutes creep up, but they're very, very low on end options now. Ryan Dunn's minutes have actually gone back to 2 and 10 and 15 and 9 after it seemed like he had settled into a high minute role. We just can't really trust him at 3.7, and I don't think we really want to go down that road with him just yet. McNeely's minutes seem more solidified. He's a lower fantasy point per minute player. He is at 4.4, but you're looking at 23 plus minutes in 4 of his last 5, actually 5 of his last 6. And he hasn't been that bad. A matchup with Louisville playing 23 to 25 minutes should be able to pay off that 4.4. Now, he doesn't have amazing rates by any stretch of the imagination, but he does have a 16% usage rate and a 19% shot rate. And he's shooting, they look to him as a gunner type. He's shooting 43% from long range on 90 attempts. So I think he's a little more intriguing of a value option than people are going to give him credit for. Nobody's really going to be looking his way, and there's no reason to think that he can't, bomb 4 to 6 triples, hit 3 of those, and whatever else he can give us on top of those, pay off the 4.4 price. I'd much rather him be 3.7 like Ryan Dunn, but he has the rates to support him as a play. And overall, the Virginia prices are tasty enough to utilize, but I'm certainly not going to be stacking them up either. Louisville, it's a no for me, dog. L. Ellis at 7.3. We know he's going to play the entire game. He's kind of just been not an ignore, because you don't want to do that. He had 43 against Miami, but he hasn't been a priority play this year for me as much as I thought he would be. Defenses just know they can collapse on him. Now, his price is low as it's been in well over a month. So at 7.3, you've got to at least consider him, but it's a really, really tough matchup at the even at home against Virginia. Just doesn't have to move the needle for me too much there. I'll throw him into a lineup or two, sure, but I'm mainly going to be looking away. I did see the additional minutes for a value 2 games ago against Pittsburgh. I don't want to butcher the name, but it's Emmanuel Okafor. He has been playing 19 plus minutes in back-to-back games, 18 plus in 3 of his last 5, which is when he first started playing. He was late to play the season, just started on the 28th of January. He's 5 games in. So what we know about Okafor is this. He has an extremely high foul rate as a raw freshman with size. We knew that going in, he was going to probably be a fouler. And that's been the case. 9.2 fouls per 40 in his first 5 games. But he does have an 11% block rate. He does have a offensive rebounding rate of 16%, a combined rate of over 30%, and he's literally just 5 games into his career, a 21.3% shot rate, a 20.6% usage rate. So there's reason to like what he's doing, and he's only 3.8. I think that we have this tendency to write off Virginia games, and for good reason, but it's not as if they're going to completely shut a team out. And we've seen the Virginia front court actually give up some pretty decent stat lines to opposing bigs. Emmanuel Okafor is very, very raw, so we're looking at him probably getting into foul trouble here regardless on some of the guys driving. But at 3.8, if he can get somewhere to 15, 18 minutes, I think he pays that price off there because of his solid rates. Jalen Withers, JJ Traynor, Kamari Lands, Mike James. No. It's Okafor. I just like saying that name, Okafor. That's just rolls off the tongue. And maybe a little LLS, but otherwise I want me some Beekman, Vanderplas, McNeely from the Virginia side. All right, moving on to the next game here. Sorry. Running on very little sleep from last night, man. I remember not sleeping. We joke about Rothstein, we sleep in May and all that, but I legit just don't sleep. When I was with Roto Curve, a lot of you guys follow me from there. I was just pulling all-nighters all the time during the conference tournaments and into March, and I don't remember being this tired, man. Getting old is a bitch, huh? Getting old. I'm on the wrong side of 35 at this point, fellas. I gotta drink some coffee or something before I go on because damn, I'm feeling tired. All right, moving on here, though, we have to talk about everybody's favorite team, especially Adam Young's favorite team. I just know he's going to make a comment in the Discord tomorrow about, I don't know how we can get away from Ryan Howard or a Georgia Tech player. No, just kidding with you, Adam. No, he always finds some super sneak plays. He's a great guy, great editor, but I like to argue with him because he has a lot to say, and we're both strongly opinionated. So somebody that I can get my daily arguing out with, that's not my wife, because, that's a no-win situation for all of us. But anyways, Georgia Tech versus Virginia Tech. The double Virginia Tech stack has been so profitable this year, especially in conference play. Grant Basile crushing it, has risen his price all the way up to 9-1. Brand favorite Justin Mutz crushing it. They just made the Notre Dame zone their bitch. And they were low. Go figure, they were lower owned against that Notre Dame team. And that was just a couple of days ago. I had Mike on for that one, and he asked me which I'd play. I said, if you can only play one Mutz, but I'm playing them both. They just keep going off together. Their prices are going up because of it. But this matchup against Georgia Tech is another phenomenal spot to target them. I think Basile is going to really scare people off because that's a really high price. I mean, that is a terrifying amount to pay for him. But I think at this point, he's proven, throughout the years at Wright State, how good he could be against upper tier competition when they got it. And, he's got some defensive deficiencies, and if you look his name up on Twitter and you check Virginia Tech fans, they were all calling for his head, saying he can't play, he can't defend, get him out of here. And now, of course, they love him because he's scoring and rebounding at a very high level. And we're seeing other guys from his same program there that, Tanner Holden, Ohio State, not getting minutes and not playing. So the talent is very high level for Basile, and I think he's warranted using at this high price. I think at some point he's going to get so high, if he continues at this torrid pace, he's going to be over 10K, and that's going to be a little bit tough. Now, with the amount of his usage, shot rates, rebounding he's doing, he's starting to have the same role that he had at Wright State. I mean, he somehow has a higher shot rate here at Tech than he had at any point at Wright State. And last year at Wright State, he was part of that group. That was absolutely phenomenal. They finished 22-14 when they got into the tournament. When they win that game against Bryant, that was a fun game, right? They pushed Arizona for a little bit, but Tanner Holden, Trey Calvin, and Grant Basile, that trio, they were really nice. Calvin stayed behind. He's having a nice season, but 28.8% shot rate, 28.7% usage rate, 30% combined rebounding rate. These are last year's Basile numbers, a 5% block rate, run around a 30% three-point shooter on 137 attempts, and drawing 5.1 fouls per 40. This year on Virginia Tech, 27% usage rate, which has gone down about 1.5%. Not a huge deal. 30.1% shot rate, that's gone up. His rebounding rate has collectively gone down. However, he's still a top 20 in the conference rebounder overall with a combined rate of 25 percent, over 25%. He does have the 13th best block rate in the ACC. Overall, he's 5.5%. He's drawing 4.3 fouls per 40. He's making 61% of his 2-point field goals. That's the 9th best rate in the conference, and he's making 39% of his threes, which is up a ton from last year at 29 to 30%. He did in his sophomore season shoot 48% from long range. That was on 42 attempts. Now he has volume and he's shooting extremely well. He just can't miss. He's really, really, really worth paying this price because of how well he's going. 19 shot attempts against Notre Dame, 21 shot attempts against Boston College, 23 shot attempts against Syracuse the second time they played, 17 against them the first time. He's just really good right now, and I'm inclined to continue to heat check him, and I've been able to enjoy him when he's a little bit cheaper and ride with him. And I think playing him with Mutz continues to be an intriguing matchup because here's the thing. Mutz is scoring at a higher level lately, and he's also getting a lot of assists, rebounds. So that's great. His peripherals are strong. But the shots that Basili's taking and making, Mutz is assisting on a lot of those. Mutz has 8+ assists in 3 of his last 8, which includes 9 against Notre Dame, 8 against Virginia, and 8 against Syracuse. So we're seeing Justin Mutz contribute in all categories at a high level. Basili more the scorer. He does rebound, but we're seeing a situation where you play both of them in the lineup and every bucket scored, you're hitting multiple pieces because Mutz is making those passes, or Basili's grabbing a rebound, goes to Mutz, miss a shot, Basili a rebound, passes to Mutz, Mutz passes back to Basili, a bucket, assist. Like, you're just racking up fantasy points so quickly, and we already know Georgia Tech is absolute garbage. Josh Pastner, absolute garbage. So don't be afraid to play both these Virginia Tech guys if you can fit them. Obviously, that's going to be a tough ask. The combined salary is really high. Playing both of them drops you automatically down to a 5.4K per player average immediately. You'll have to play some of the value to get that back up. It's tough, and I know that. But these guys combining for 90+, 100+, I mean, we'll pay 8.5 and 9.1 because that's not that high for them. Anyone else for Virginia Tech? It's kind of come to the point where it's Mutz, Basili for me or nothing. Hunter Couture is at least interesting at 6'1". That's probably a little bit on the cheap side for him. Gifted scorer, with all the extra defensive attention on Mutz, Basili, and even Sean Padula, that's allowed Couture to just chuck. He did only take 3 shots in that Notre Dame game, and that was in 36 minutes, but Basili and Mutz were going so crazy. But Couture had 20 fantasy points with 3 shot attempts. Rebounds, assists were there, had a steal. He's contributing in more categories than just shooting, where typically he's leaning heavily on his ability to score to pay off, but he's shown a propensity to contribute in other categories. And he was priced up over 7K just a few weeks ago, so we're getting him at a steep discount of 6'1". So he's in the pool for sure. $1,300 cheaper than Sean Padula. Padula has flashed some upside, but I think Couture probably matches him for cheaper more often than he doesn't. Values with Rodney Rice out, Darius Maddox questionable. I don't know that Maddox is going to be returning in this one. It sounds like whatever personal thing he's got going on, he's going to miss another game at least. That means MJ Collins, who's sitting there at 3.5, will play 30+ minutes. Low fantasy point per minute player. However, Georgia Tech modifier, perhaps maybe he can get 4x for us, 5x for us at the 3.5 price. Certainly going to be on the floor for a long time. But Basili and Mutz, that is where I'm going to go. No cuts, no mutts, no coconuts, as Wreck-It Ralph would say, except it's butts instead of mutts. All right, Georgia Tech side. Virginia Tech's defense has been kind of lackluster too. They're 112th nationally in defensive efficiency, not good. 15-10 record here for Mike Young. I expected a little better, especially 23-13 last year. They end up making the run, winning the ACC tournament, getting bounced very early. I had them going super deep in the tournament. This team, I think obviously maybe not quite as good as last year, and all they're really missing is Kiva Luma. I know Storm Murphy's not there, but whatever. Padula's been much better. Mutt's obviously taking his game to another level. Basili, not the same player as Aluma. but very similar in a lot of regards. I think this Virginia Tech team has the capabilities to make a run here late. Looking at their schedule, it's super favorable as well. Georgia Tech, Pittsburgh, Miami, which is a tougher game, Duke, which depending on who you talk to, that could be a tough game, Louisville, and Florida State. So a very favorable matchup, list of matchups there where they could theoretically win out or lose one game, maybe to like a Miami or a Pittsburgh. And they're going to be riding Basili and Mutz very, very hard into the conference tournament. So starts with this Georgia Tech matchup and a team that can't defend very well. They are decent against the three, but Basili and Mutz will just take them inside and do what they do. So I think because of Virginia Tech's lackadaisical defense, at least in conference play, to the point where they're giving up fantasy-friendly scores to their opponents, we have to at least consider some of these Georgia Tech guys, but be prepared to get Pastnered at any time. The primary or alpha at the current time is Javon Franklin, which at 7-1, I'm a little uncomfortable with that price, but 34-plus fantasy points in 4 straight. He's been able to take advantage of these softer matchups against Notre Dame, Louisville, Wake, tore up NC State, which I think we're quickly learning bigs are having to run roughshod against NC State. We saw tonight with Jesse Edwards. So I think Javon Franklin is interesting with the bigger minutes, and as long as they come, he's going to have the opportunity to score, rebound, produce at a high level. But he's a very low-end GPP play for me, and if he ends up being super popular, I may end up just taking him completely out of the pool. There's so much risk with a popular Georgia Tech player. We just saw it recently over the weekend. Kyle Sturdivant, super cheap, playing relatively well. He was under 4K. He's coming off of 3 straight games of 16-plus fantasy points. He played 34-plus minutes in each. Comes into the game against Wake Forest and we get Pastnered. We get Pastnered. Like, why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Why do I keep doing this to myself? I played Sturdivant on that slate because he was 3.9. He plays 15 minutes, took 8 shots. Yay. 5 points, 1 rebound, 1 assist, 7.5 fantasy points against Wake Forest. Now his price jumps to 5K. Obviously, we're not going to be looking at using him, or I'm not. But if he gets 33 minutes from Pastner, I think he pays off the 5K, but I'm not willing to use him to find out. And I'm really not so sure I'm willing to pay 7-1 for Franklin or 6-9 for Davon Smith. Davon Smith, same thing. Popular, chalky play, in the early to mid-January. He put up a couple of 30s here or there. One I know against Notre Dame, one against Pittsburgh. Becomes popular, goes from playing 36 minutes to 18 against NC State for some reason, barely plays. Then he pops back up to 34 against Syracuse, has some nice games, becomes popular again, and then falls off the face of the earth, plays 4 minutes against NC State, and now he's back up to 30. This is Josh Pastner at his finest, folks. There is a group of coaches in this college basketball game that we know and love that are just so bad for DFS. Pastner has to be near the top. Mike White, Brad Underwood, there's some really horrific coaches here with what they're doing with their rotation. So if Davon Smith plays 32 minutes, absolutely. I think he's fine even against Virginia Tech. Their defense isn't as elite as it's been maybe in the past. 6-9's a fine price for him at 32 minutes. If he's playing 18 minutes, it's obviously not going to work out. It's a terrible spot. I couldn't tell you with any certainty what Josh Pastner is actually going to do with this group. So I'm treading lightly, and like I said, I'm going to be under the field. Lance Terry, he was do I have to keep doing this? He was popular value, put up back-to-back 30 fantasy point games. Then he started falling off a cliff, goes to 19 minutes. I don't know, man. This is just terrible. It's absolutely terrible. I think if you've got balls and you're brazen and you kind of fall in line in cash games with the rest of the field as the conventional wisdom tells you to, Davon Smith or Javon Franklin, I think, are probably okay in that regard, but horrible, strategically speaking, horrible plays in large field in any other contest besides single entry cash games. That's what I had to say about Georgia Tech. So let's not keep getting Pastner, because true definition, cliche of insanity, we got to stop. We got to stop this madness. All right, Kentucky versus Mississippi State. Kassan Wallace, what did you do? What did you do to us over the weekend? What did Kentucky do? Losing that game to Georgia was pretty inexcusable for Cal. People asking me if they're going to let Kyle go. He has a lifetime contract, which technically doesn't actually mean anything because they can get rid of him. But he has an amazing class coming in next year. They have to let it play out because if they get rid of him, that class, poof, they go elsewhere. If they come out flat or they're not looking like they're making the tournament with that group next year, then I think the Cal to somewhere elseville is really on the table. Son Wallace was horrible against Georgia, missed his PRA. That was the most painful thing for me, but he's picked up the foul bug. In his last 5 games alone, he has had 3 or more fouls in 4 of them. 14 total in 4 games. So definitely has picked up an issue there. Now, he was playing really well prior to the Georgia game. He had 3 straight over 33 fantasy points. He had been dealing with a back issue. We saw him miss, or be limited at the very least. Taking a lot of shots. Conventional wisdom also says CJ Frederick, Severe Wheeler in those last games, sitting out. Wallace is going to handle the rock a little bit. He's going to take shots. He should be the guy. And he just didn't get it done. So I don't want to be gun shy to go back to Wallace. I think going back to his PRA makes a lot of sense. But Mississippi State has the chops to make this one ugly. Really, really force him into bad shots. Like I could see Wallace going into like a 2 for 13 type of day, which really scares me. And we're not getting a good enough discount at 7.5. The real shooter on this team, the Kellen Grady role this year has become Antonio Reeves, who was burying 3 after 3 against Georgia last game. It just wasn't enough to overcome. I've seen him score 29 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 4, chucking a lot at 5.7. If Wheeler's out, Frederick out, that makes Reeves very playable again. He's played 30 and 40 minutes over the last 2 games. 4 of his last 5, he's been over 30. So Reeves getting the big minutes with Wheeler banged up and Frederick also banged up. So we'll wait to see there. The price has increased a little bit to 5.7, but with Kentucky being so shorthanded or trending towards shorthanded, I think Reeves is definitely a viable option. Shot rates off, highest on the team at 28.4%, shooting 42% from long range. Now, Oscar Tshiebwe, woo! I've been on the fade Oscar train for a long time. I played Oscar at West Virginia when he first came up his freshman year, at the cheap price, saw him start to develop. Then he comes to Kentucky and has some monster slate breaking performances. But I can tell you with 100% certainty that over the course of the last 2 years, fading, if you just flatly faded Oscar every slate, didn't even put any thought into it, matchups, all that, you just straight said, I'm going to fade him every slate, you would actually be more, depending on the rest of your lineup too, obviously, but to bear with me here, you would actually end up more optimal fading him every game than if you were to play him every game, because he's been busting a lot, and there's been games where he gets into foul trouble, and putting up 70. It's sexy when that happens, but he's not doing that as often as people seem to think in their mind. And the supporting cast of characters around him, aside from Antonio Reeves, who can shoot the lights out, they're not good enough shooters to maximize Oscar's potential, and that's why you're seeing him struggle. He's generating for himself, grabbing such a high number of rebounds, but the defense can afford to collapse, because if Reeves isn't on the floor, where is the shooting coming from? Jacob Toppin has the ability to get hot, but he's nowhere near consistent. He's shooting 25% from long range on 36 attempts. Clearly, that's not going to get it done. Severe Wheeler has taken 41 threes. He's been able to shoot about 36%, but not typically known for his ability to even score. Usually, Cason Wallace is shooting 39% from long range, but he's come on lately. CJ Frederick, who, was expected to be a gunner for this team, shooting in the low 30s. There just hasn't been the shooting that I think they need to really maximize Oscar's potential. And it makes it very difficult to utilize him. And I don't think this is a spot against Mississippi State that is going to end up too optimal. I know we put up 53 against Georgia. Georgia is a very soft front court. We can target against them often. KJ Williams was okay tonight. LSU is just a bad team, but typically teams against Georgia, they're able to put up big numbers. But 26 against Arkansas, 27 against Florida, 34 against Ole Miss, 37 against Kansas. Like anything under 40 is just not good enough. 37 against Vanderbilt, 29 against Texas A&M. I ended up 44 against South Carolina, 11 against Alabama, 46 against LSU, 47 against Louisville, 50 against Missouri. So that, then we're going all the way back. So you're seeing an SEC play. Alabama kind of laid out the blueprint, and teams are mirroring that are capable of doing it. Georgia is not a team that was capable of mirroring that, and they weren't stopping Reeves or Oscar. And Reeves was so hot from long range, it allowed Oscar to get more shots. It allowed Oscar to do the things he likes to do and needs to do to be effective. So this is a game that I think could turn ugly for Kentucky. We'll see. They need Wheeler to be in there. Wheeler is actually kind of interesting at 4.9. Just because it is so cheap. I actually used him against Florida, and he came through, relatively speaking, with 19. But I think you see, out of necessity, if he does go, him play 28 to 30 minutes. However, Cal is not up to speed on modern-day basketball. He keeps trying to play a style that was really elite in 1994, but not so much in 2023. So until he figures out, and I mean, he's like a short window, somebody starts getting hot, they get healthy, Wallace starts shooting 40+% with regularity, Wheeler starts knocking it down, then I think the struggles continue, and Oscar becomes a borderline total fade in every single lineup, or at the very least, you're playing him in 1 to 2 in case he does go off. You have some exposure, but he's not a main team guy. He's just not a main team guy, I think, at this point in the season. I could very easily eat my words, but I think we're going to see him put up 32 to 38 tomorrow, and that's just not good enough. All right, moving on to Mississippi State. Tolu Smith. Are you guys tired of the Tolu Smith experience yet? Because, my God, man, every single time we forgive Tolu Smith, got to keep the short, memory on this stuff. You got to just, play a guy in a good spot. Tolu Smith goes through a really, really bad stretch of games where he could just barely register to get to 20 fantasy points. He had 5 of 6 where he didn't hit over 20 from December into early January. And then he started playing well again. Pops a real strong 62 against TCU, 33 against South Carolina, 45 against Missouri. Coming up on a slate against a bad LSU team, finally start to dip our toe back in the water with Tolu, and he proceeds to struggle mightily against LSU, 19 fantasy points. Minor bounce back against Arkansas for 26.5, but Tolu I think he's played his way out of main team viability. He's more of an alt play now at this point, and going up against Kentucky of Oscar, the rebounding opportunities may not be there for him. I think at this point, if you want to use anybody on this team, the main guys to look at, Deshaun Davis, who sits there at 6K, Shaquille Moore at 6'1", still 2 guys who are a little bit on the lower end side overall, I think, but this Kentucky defense on the road especially has been a fantasy-friendly group. That's the other thing with Oscar, reeling it back a second, on the road, these SEC refs, you just know fouls are going to come into play here. They're going to go at Oscar. They're going to ask Tolu to get him into some foul trouble, and I can very easily see that happen. Shaquille Moore has taken 11-plus shots in 3 of his last 4, starting to look good. A very high upside, mega talent coming over from NC State, 22-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. I don't mind him at 6'1", as a last guy in, or if you're building a more balanced approach. And then Deshaun Davis, who has had mixed results this year. He started playing extremely well to end January, starts February a little cold, but playing big minutes, 28 to 32, 6K. Again, I think he's inviolable last man, into your lineup category. All right, 4 games left going through here. Let's move on to the next one. we're going to talk about Arkansas versus Texas A&M. This is Corey's gym. This is his game. Arkansas, a very tough matchup, I think, for both sides, or at least to get excited about. And I'm feeling a little bit Creighton-esque here because the prices on Arkansas feel roughly where they should be. The prices on Texas A&M's, actually relevant options feels about where it should be. Ricky Council sitting there at 6'9" for Arkansas. I think there's upside to be had at that price for him, playing damn near every minute of the game, whether he starts or comes off the bench. At least Council's going to play a lot. That's one thing we can trust, relatively speaking, Coach Musselman on. He's going to play Council a lot. You look at the rates for Ricky Council: 25% shot rate, 24% usage rate. Does draw 5 fouls per 40. Not a great three-point shooter, but he just knows how to score. The other Arkansas options here now with Nick Smith rolling into the rotation again. They ran a shorter rotation, which is nice to see, but Anthony Black, Devo Davis, Ricky Council, and the Mitchell brothers. Now, the Black, Davis, and Council group have been starting pretty consistently. It's been the forwards where it's Jalen Graham starting, Jordan Walsh starting. We've seen a variety of guys starting in those 4th and 5th spots. There's been no solidified, player into that role. We've seen Kamani Johnson be there. We've seen Joseph Mannion. We've seen, Barry Dunning. We've just seen a variety of guys. Right now it's the Mitchells, but it could very easily be Jalen Graham. We've got Nick Smith back in the mix here. He made his, after missing all of January and a game or two in December, and also missing all of November before playing 3 or 4 games. He started 4 of those back in December, by the way. He started to settle in, and you could see the high upside there in those games against Oklahoma, where he scored 21 real, 22 against Greensboro, and 16 against San Jose State. First game back against Mississippi State, plays 17 minutes off the bench, 5 points, 1 rebound, 1 assist, whatever. 21% usage rate, 17 minutes. We're going to obviously see Arkansas lean heavier on this kid. He's only 5'8". Do I want to nut up and play him? I absolutely do. Do I hate the fact that it's on the road? Yes. Do I hate the fact that they're playing Texas A&M? Yes. I hate the fact that he's probably not going to play 20 minutes? Yes. And I'm nowhere near as confident as I was earlier today or last night about Jack Clark coming back in a similar situation from being out a long time. See the minutes increase. He was in a better situation because the matchup was better, of course. But I think Nick Smith warrants getting some ownership exposure to, because 5'8" for a player who, when fully healthy and firing on all cylinders, is going to produce at an 8 or 9K level. So I'm on board with using Nick Smith if you want to. Just don't go too crazy with it. Rates are high, 32% shot rate in the 6 games he's played this year, 26% usage rate, 15% assist rate, shooting right about 30% from long range. Where he excels at is drawing fouls, draws 4.8, and getting to the foul line. 20 free throw attempts in only 6 games. Nick Smith, let's see you get some big minutes tomorrow. Anthony Black has really blossomed. 7.2 is just an okay price, playing basically every minute, even with Nick Smith there. We've seen him score 31-plus fantasy points in 3 straight. So, Anthony Black has to be considered. I just wonder how the pecking order changes. Do they ride the hot hand? Does Nick Smith demand more shots? How that works out for Anthony Black, because I don't think he's the alpha with a healthy Nick Smith. And then, of course, Devo Davis, who's playing just about every single game or every single minute as well. In the past season or two, you couldn't trust those minutes to continue. At this point, with this makeup of the roster and a distinct lack of options off the bench, Devo Davis is safely playing 38 minutes a game in SEC play. You could definitely use him at only 6'5". Texas A&M. Wade Taylor is always near the top of the priority list when it comes to the Aggies. 8.4 is a pretty tough price to me, so I do think he's good to use, but that is a very steep price. The likes of the Clemson guys are there. that I'd rather play. You have Justin Mutz, who I'd rather play in that range. We haven't got to the game yet, but Boo Buie, who's been really solid. The Oregon guys against my Huskies. There's just a myriad of options there in that price range that I think I'd rather play than using Wade Taylor, even though he's been pretty strong this season. Rates are strong, 29% shot rate, 28% usage rate, 33% assist rate, drawing 5.2 fouls per 40, making 36% of his long-range jumpers. So he's been great. He's been good. He's definitely not like a full fade at that price, but I just wonder if we can do a little bit better. He has scored 30-plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5, but this matchup against Arkansas definitely doesn't look great for him. He was held to 24 fantasy points last time they played Arkansas, but he took 19 shots. So that's important to note. Let's pull up that box score, by the way, so we can look at that. All right, it was an 81-70 win for Arkansas. In that one, Henry Coleman scored 18 and had double-digit rebounds, which crazy, 18 and 15. Don't chase that. Tyrese Radford, 17, 7, and 6. Big game for him. Wade Taylor, 18 and 2. Then you saw Dexter Dennis with 9, Julius Marble with 8. And they played 4 guys off the bench, but only 2 of them played 14 or more minutes, with Anderson Garcia being the only one to do much of anything, and he fouled out in those 15 minutes, or he might have played more. So the shorter rotation for the Aggies in that game led to some pretty high scores overall. But trusting Henry Coleman at 6'7", good luck with that. Julius Marble, 5'5". It's an okay price, but he's just really not a fantasy option. Tyrese Radford, you guys know my opinion on him. I think he's overpriced at anything over 7K. Definitely a capable producer, but again, spend our money a little bit better. Dexter Dennis at 6'1", just an okay play to me. I think Anderson Garcia at 4'6" is in the conversation for value because of what he's shown when giving the minutes. Probably at this point, their best bench guy. He's played 20-plus minutes in 5 of his last 6. A solid enough fantasy point per minute number where he's probably 3x at this number at 4.6 more often than not, with the upside for making 4x plus value. All right, 3 games left. I gotta get a drink. Give me 1 second. I'll be right back. All right, guys. I gotta get a tasty beverage here, and we'll finish up. All right, back up in it. Let's get into Indiana versus Northwestern. Now, this is a on paper tough spot to look for TJD because the price is just getting exorbitant, and the matchup against Northwestern, not particularly great. Northwestern has one of the better interior defenses in the conference, but they're not completely unstoppable by any means. And TJD did work them at an Assembly Hall. Northwestern pulled off the upset on the road there, 84-83, but TJD had a phenomenal game. 18 real points, 24 rebounds, 8 assists, 4 blocks. It was a massacre performance. If you didn't have TJD that day, it was night season. Big thing about TJD is he's just playing every single minute of the game. That Northwestern game, he put up 68, which was just ridiculous. And he's continually putting up 50-plus. And it doesn't matter the matchup. Matchup be damned. The Rutgers game, 20, 18, and 6 for 52. Michigan on the road, 28, 11, and 3 for 51. 50 against a tough Maryland team. 45 against Purdue team with Zach Edey. Might we have to play TJD? Because if he's going to hang 68 on these guys again, then it's going to be tough to get away with not using him. And where we can typically beat some of these pay-ups with 2 mid-range guys, I think when TJD's flirting with 70 fantasy points, it matters very little about that value next to him. He could bagel, and there's still a very good chance that you're going to outscore the two mid-range guys. Because really, I'm looking for about 30 to 35 from those mid-range guys when I fade a player like TJD. He's capable of outscoring both of them. So we're talking about some seriously scary stuff here. We need James Breeding to ref this game if you're fading TJD and get him into some foul issues. But just an absolutely monster season for him. One of those guys who tears up the college landscape like a Zach Edey and will not be playing in the NBA, or if they do, they won't be playing very much. They'll be overseas or another league. But he's been great. Look at his numbers. Number 2 on the Ken Pom Player of the Year rankings. 30.1% usage rate, 28.8% shot rate, a offensive rebounding rate of 12%, a defensive rebounding rate of 26.2%, an assist rate of 21.4%, a block rate of 10%, and he is making roughly 58% of his shots. He does draw 6 fouls per 40. So just a monster season. I mean, absolutely monster season. When you go into the 14 conference games, his rates spike even higher. He's got the 3rd best usage rate in the conference, the 5th best shot rate, the 5th best offensive rebounding rate, the best defensive rebounding rate, 8th best assist rate, the best block rate, the best fouls drawn rate. He's just an incredible player when it comes to conference games and overall. He has been able to build on each of his seasons, and this year with Race Thompson banged up, Xavier Johnson banged up, he has had to hard carry this Indiana team into an 18-7 record. And since stumbling out the gates, losing to Iowa, Northwestern, Penn State, they've just been mowing down the competition with wins over Wisconsin, Illinois, Michigan State, Minnesota, Ohio State, Purdue, Rutgers, and Michigan. The who's of the conference. They lost to Maryland, but TJD is seriously hard carrying them, and it's very scary to think about fading. And you look at it, there's nobody else on the team over 7K because he's handling so much of the heavy lifting. Jalen Hood-Schifino, youngster, goes in waves. He also had a really big game against Northwestern where he scored 33 real on 5 triples for 41 fantasy points. He's kind of gone downhill since then, although he did pop off for almost 40 against Ohio State. Had a rough outing against Maryland. Had a rough outing against Rutgers. Against Michigan, he knocks down a bunch of shots, 8 for 15, 21 real points, 4 rebounds, 5 assists. So I actually kind of like Schifino here. If you're fading TJD, I think you gotta have a little bit of a, to borrow from the football terminology, a bit of a game script here, or let your lineup tell a story. You got to have somebody from Indiana, because theoretically what you're telling yourself and what you're saying is that if I'm fading TJD, he's going to have a mediocre game or a moderate game, and somebody else is going to pick up the slack here. And that somebody probably would be Jalen Hood-Schifino. So he is the direct pivot there if you don't go with TJD. And I'm really going to be curious about how highly owned TJD is. I'm going to do some investigative journalism like I do, and that basically all that includes is me going around to different industry guys and asking them if they're going to use a certain player, and then try to project ownership out from there. If he's going to be popular, I think it's one of those situations where I want to be a little underweight, because I think you're asking him to score on the road against a definite strong Northwestern interior defense and asking him to score 50 plus fantasy points. That's pretty tough. I think he definitely will. I mean, he did it before against them, right? But on the road is a different situation, and I'm a little bit leery. So if high owned, I'm backing off. Now, if everybody else has the same idea and they want to be underweight on TJD, and suddenly he's coming in at 15 to 20%, I'm going to jam the TJD ownership and figure out the rest later, because the upside in fading is high. The upside in being one of the few guys to roster him is even higher. So consider me in on TJD while also simultaneously being out. But we'll see how that goes tomorrow, and I'll be in the Discord. I'm working late tomorrow, but I will be around the Discord pretty much throughout the slate, talking up things and monitoring situation. So I'll get a better and clearer picture about where we might stand with rostership on TJD in the early to late afternoon. Race Thompson, man, what a terrible, terrible season has been for him, and that's mainly because of various ailments, not because of talent level. Last year at this time at 5'6", with Race Thompson, I'd be putting all my chips in on him, and he'd be giving us 30 to 35 fantasy point games. Just hasn't been able to shake off the rust, his conditioning, and get to the same level that he was last year, and now he's going into a difficult road matchup. If he plays, I think we can safely get away from him. Jordan Geronimo, who had been a very popular value play for a while, I think we can safely get away from him, even though he's only 4.3. Trey Galloway, who starts and plays a ton of minutes, sitting there at 4.7. Every time I think, hey, Trey Galloway might be a little bit playable, you go through and look at it and see he's basically a Miller Kopp light. They just stand around waiting to shoot and bricking shots. Makes it very, very difficult to trust either of those guys. And Galloway, even though he's considered a shooter and he's waiting to shoot. He's actually shooting 50% from long range, but only 40 attempts. His shot rate's only 12.4%. It's down there with Miller Kopp, who's at 13.3%. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that after TJD, who shot rate's 28%, and Jalen Hood-Schifino, who shot rate is 25%, there just isn't a lot left over. The one player I might consider that's not named TJD or Jalen Hood-Schifino could possibly be Malik Renew, who has seemingly usurped Jordan Geronimo a little bit as the primary, secondary Robin to TJD's Batman. He's not even that, but in the front court, Renew's seeing his minutes stabilize a little bit. His fantasy point per minute number is actually relatively solid. Played 24 minutes against Northwestern the first time, had over 12 fantasy points. He's shown some big upside in the past, put up 31 fantasy points against Ohio State. I think he's an intriguing option at 4 or 5 and somebody that even in a bad matchup makes sense for your GPP alts, not a main team. Northwestern, on the other hand, has several viable options, I would say. It's the usual cast of characters. Boo Buie, 8-1. I know it's a high price. Chase Adish at 7-9. I think both of those guys can be considered safe. I don't like using that word for Northwestern, but I think both guys playing the minutes that they're playing at home against Indiana, Chase is going to play for all 40 minutes. It's going to take 15-plus shots. 7-9 is just not high enough. Same thing with Boo Buie. He's going to play every single minute. He's going to take a ton of shots. He took 20 shots against Purdue. In that last game, had 47 fantasy points, 26, 4-3, 3 blocks, 3 steals. Just probably the best game I've ever seen, the most complete game I've ever seen from Boo Buie. The one thing about him is he's tortured the DFS industry over the years, and when he becomes popular, he tends to bust for whatever reason. But I want exposure to both of those guys in this matchup. We've seen Brooks Barnhizer play very, very well. He's playing extended minutes. 20-plus minutes in each of his last 10 games. So he's been a very solid option for them with Julian Roper in and out of the lineup. Robbie Barron, who was a non-con hero, he's really fallen off to an unplayable level. So Barnhizer has usurped him as a viable option. And then you're looking at Matthew Nicholson, who was a interesting or adequate value early in the season, but he hasn't been since. And then lastly, Ty Berry, who has the capability of shooting the lights out. He did have 22 fantasy points against Purdue, which is solid, and he only scored 5 real. That's not typical of his game. He's usually going to rely heavily on his ability to knock down threes. Saw a game against Nebraska earlier this year, mid-January, hit 6 triples, had 39 fantasy points, didn't do a lot in the secondary categories, but 26 real. That's usually the variation of Ty Berry we're going to see. And at 4-9, he does make a lot of sense here against Indiana, playing roughly 28 to 32 minutes. He makes a ton of sense. Like I said, Indiana's 3-point defense is just kind of average. But I think the fact that Northwestern keeps a short rotation and playing their guards heavy means that any of them are in play, from Boo Buie down to Brooks Barnhizer, and Ty Berry. Indiana, I'm not that impressed with them. Moving on to the next game, TCU versus Iowa State. Yeah, so Mike Miles being out has really led to some phenomenal performances from Damian Bowe. It does sound like Mike Miles has been practicing the last day or so. Good chance he returns, which TCU does need him. You saw they lost a close one to Baylor. They got their doors blown off by K-State. They lost a close one to Oklahoma State. Lost a close one to Mississippi State. They're just dropping games without Mike Miles. But Damian Bowe has been ridiculously good. 16, 7, and 10 against Baylor, 44 fantasy points. 16, 5, and 5 against K-State, 30 fantasy points. 12, 6, and 5 against Oklahoma State for 32. 16, 6, and 10 for 40 against West Virginia, and 19, 5, and 4 for 32 against Mississippi State. He's been great. Paying almost $8K for him is not an easy thing to do, I know. But if Mike Miles is out again, I think we probably want to jam Bowe in there because he's come a long way, first of all, since his Memphis days. His rates have become extremely solid, and he's playing an absolute F ton of minutes. 36 to basically the entire game. Usage rate in those games without Miles have all been 22% or higher. He's taking double-digit shots as well, which is something we maybe not so accustomed to him on a regular basis. With Miles returning, I don't necessarily think it takes him fully out of play. It certainly takes a lot of shots off the table for him, but it will increase or keep his assist rate extremely high, and he'll still have the opportunity to work the glass like he's been doing. Looking at Bowe, 22% usage rate, a 28.2% assist rate, 3% steal rate, 26% from long range, not great there, but adequate enough, I suppose, and draws 4 fouls per 40. Where he's at his best is when he is getting to the lane. Now you look at conference games; they've played in 12 so far. He's playing the third most minutes in the conference. He has the 18th best usage rate. He has the 4th best assist rate and the 21st best fouls drawn rate. Also the 10th best steals rate. So Damian Bowe is solid, even if Mike Miles returns. You don't have to be too scared to get exposure to Bowe. There are certainly worse things. Outside of him, Micah Peavy sits there at 4.7. We've seen a lot of popularity when it comes to Micah Peavy. He's kind of a lower fantasy point per minute guy. We had 30 against K-State, but you quite often will see him hover around single digits, although he was fine against Baylor as well. He played 26 minutes, but party's over with Miles likely returning sooner rather than later, which takes Peavy pretty much out of play. It takes Shahada Wells out of play if Miles is back because he's up there at 6'3", which is just a very tough price to swallow because with Miles in the lineup, Wells probably goes back to playing 8 to 10 minutes. Obviously, at that point, 6'3" becomes a joke of a price. Jacoby Coles is really nice. I think he's actually a phenomenal play at 5'9" for large field GPPs because the price increase, and I think it's the highest he's been all season. Correct me if I'm wrong. Oh, he's been 6K one other time. Very high fantasy point per minute player. Seems to be stuck at that 18 to 22 minute range, but he's putting up 20 plus fantasy points very, very regularly. Tough matchup against Iowa State, but he has really strong rates himself. 26.8% shot rate, 23.2% usage rate, 30% combined rebounding rate, 4% block rate, 2.5% steals rate, drawing 4 fouls per 40 and shooting 33% from long range on 52 attempts. So I actually really like Coles, his prospects for the future, as well as right now. Everybody looking to go to a player like Damian Bowe without Miles, or if Miles returns, maybe people sprinkle a little bit of ownership there. There will be nobody on Coles, and he's not fit, negatively impacted by Miles returning. Nothing like drinking a frap at 11 o'clock, eh? If Eddie Lampkin is out, I think Coles, he goes close to main team viability even against Iowa State. If Lampkin plays, then he's more of that GPP category. Iowa State is starting to reel a little bit, so I don't want to avoid targeting against them necessarily, but obviously on the road or the Hilton Magic, that can be a real problem for opposing teams. So I just want to tread lightly there. I definitely don't want to be stacking TCU, but I also don't want to miss out on a game that I think will end up being relatively close with some overtime upside. Iowa State, they have slid a little bit. They've lost 4 of their last 5, Missouri, Texas Tech, West Virginia, Oklahoma State. They beat Kansas, spanked them, in fact. But this is probably the closest thing to a must-win game that Iowa State has seen all season. Now, the prices on Iowa State, guys, they're fair. Gabe Kalshore at 6'1", Oshuni at 6K, Caleb Grill at 6'2", all just like pretty much priced for 3.5 to 4x. Jaron Holmes at 6'8". I think there's a little bit of upside here in this matchup. TCU's been a fantasy-friendly backcourt, even with Bow's high steal rate. We've seen it time and time again. Guys score against them. And then you have Tamin Lipsey at 6'3", who I do think actually is one of the better players. He's only a freshman too. One of the better players on the team when it comes to racking up fantasy points. Obviously, maybe not the most talented or the best right now in the real game of basketball, but in the fantasy world, I think the freshman is at this point becoming one of the better plays on the Cyclones. His usage rate's around 18%, his shot rate about 15%. That's going to need time to go up, but he has a 30% assist rate, which is top 75 in the country, and a 4% steal rate. He is looking more and more comfortable. We're seeing odds play him 30-plus minutes in this starting role that he's manned most of the season since the very beginning, and we've seen him play some really big minutes, but lately in the last 4 or 5, we're seeing him play most of, if not the entire game, and be trusted a lot more. Throughout the season, when he's playing 24 to 30 minutes, he'd have a usage rate of 9%, 12%. In the last 3, his usage rate has been no lower than 23%. And he's been taking a very high number of shots. The Kansas game, he especially broke out, 9 points, 8 rebounds, 10 assists, and 3 steals. This is a spot against TCU he can definitely perform in. The first time they played TCU, it was a 69-67 win for Iowa State on the road. In that one, Lipsey played 28 minutes, 10 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and a steal. So you can see just filling it up. The elevated price tag that he is right now, that stat line wouldn't be enough, but at least you know that he's going to contribute in all categories, which makes his floor that much higher. That was also a game where Gabe Kalshore hit a bunch of shots, had 15, 3, and 4 with 3 steals. Damian Bow had 17, 7, and 5, 6 turnovers though. Mike Miles had 18 and 2. Everybody else was fairly mediocre / pedestrian. So Tamin Lipsey, 6'3", my favorite Cyclones play. I think he can definitely get it done against his TCU squad. And then, guys like Holmes, Oshuni, Grill are just okay. I think I will probably be removing them from the player pool, except maybe Jaron Holmes. But if you end up with a salary for one of those guys as your last guy in, I totally get it, and I don't mind it at all. All right, the nightcap game, Pac-12, the late night hammer. Let's go. Oregon, who we hate, going up against the Washington Huskies, who we love. My Huskies coming off an embarrassing loss. Just, you can't lose to the Washington State Cougars. You just can't, man. It's just brutal. It was a road game, but 56-51, low-scoring game. It was embarrassing. Keon Brooks with major fouls, just couldn't get anything going. This is a spot where we definitely want to look to target Oregon, even on the road. If there's one thing about my Huskies, time and time again, and they play a hybrid zone as well, they're just getting crushed by bigs, and especially versatile bigs. So don't be surprised if they're the high post is less against them. But three-point shooters definitely. But on the low block, they're just getting absolutely cranked repeatedly. This is the reason that on that Washington State game, we were also high on Mo Gay. Most everyone had him 17 points and 15 rebounds in that game. He wasn't a sneak. I think at this point, people are starting to realize just how bad my Huskies are in the front court. They got just, absolutely wrecked time and time again by opposing bigs. And overall, it doesn't matter what position they are. Going into the USC game there. We gave up a ton to Trey White, the freshman wing, who's playing a little bit of 4-5, 22, 8-4 against us, just completely obliterated. The game against UCLA, Adam Bana had 10-8, 2 blocks and 2 steals. Jaime Jaquez had 15-10. We just keep giving up these big stat lines. Don't want to know what Tubelis and Balo did again. This is from Arizona. Tubelis 25, 10-4. Balo 21, 12-6. So this is a phenomenal spot to target bigs for Oregon. Who are some of the bigs we can look at for Oregon, you may ask? Well, thank you. Number one, let me tell you. We're looking at N'Faly Dante, number one of the higher priorities on the slate. There are a bunch on this slate that I like. But as the nightcap, late hammer, whatever you want to say, N'Faly Dante looks like he's going to have a massive game. We're talking like 15 rebounds or more type of game against the Huskies. Nate Biddle had been working his way into the rotation. He's the other 7-footer on the team. Been starting the last month of the season. Only 11 minutes in that last game. Got into some foul trouble the game before that, but he's had some pretty big performances. Whenever Dante's been in foul trouble or is dealing with, an injury, Biddle's been able to come in and have some big games. And his best was against Colorado back on the 26th, in which he had 11 points and 13 rebounds. But with Dante around, Biddle's just a secondary option. Now, the starters for Oregon are typically this: Will Richard, Jermaine Cuisinart, N'Faly Dante, Rivaldo Soares, and Nate Biddle, with Kashawn Bartholomew, Quincy Carrier, and Khalil Ware off the bench. Locke Weir and Brendan Rigsby at this point are barely playing. So looking at the rates, we'll start with Dante because he is by far and away my favorite play for this game. 26% usage rate, 25% shot rate, a combined rebounding rate of 33%, 6% block rate, 3% steal rate, drawing 5 fouls per 40, shooting 63% from the field. A lot of high percentage looks for the senior Dante. He's going to hurt us real bad, unfortunately. Let's go. Let's see. They haven't played us yet. They played Washington State. Trying to get history of what he's done against Washington before. He didn't have a great couple of games against Washington last year, but he had a major foul trouble in those ones. And he's a lot more – he was very raw still last year. He's a lot more controlled with the way he plays, and he's a lot more of an overall consistent threat. Maybe he doesn't pop off for 50-plus as often as some of the other guys, but you look at his logs and you're going to see a very strong 20, 25 fantasy point performer, or his floor, I should say, with the upside for more. Now, the Cougars have similar issues with bigs. The Washington State Cougars, they get beat up against opposing bigs quite often as well. And when Dante played the Cougars, there were some foul issues which held him to 24 minutes. This was back in December. He had 30 fantasy points in those 24 minutes. So very big opportunity for him to have a massive double-double and put up a similar stat line to what we just saw Mo Gay do to my Huskies. So Dante, my favorite. I still think Will Richardson is too high at 8-2. Haven't found myself using – he's been around forever too. Haven't found myself using him very often. Sometimes I kick myself about it, right? He puts up 38 against USC, but then he drops back down to 14 against UCLA. This is a good matchup for him. But at 8-2, again, there's so many guys above him in the 8K to mid-8K, late 8K range that I prefer over Will Richardson. And I'd rather just save a little bit of money going to Dante in a matchup that I think he can exploit. Jermaine Cuisinart's typically a pretty popular value, 6'7". It's high enough to keep people away. Don't really have to worry about him too much at that price, but he does have the upside for 30. Nate Biddle at 5'3" is interesting if he plays 20-ish minutes. If those minutes aren't there, he's pretty useless overall. Kashawn Bartholomew, same thing, 5'1". He's playing about mid-20s minutes, low fantasy point per minute player, but the matchup against the Huskies is always good. Then you have a 3'6" Rivaldo Soares who's starting, playing well over 20 to 25 minutes per game. Another guy with a low fantasy point per minute total, but at 36 or 3.6K, playing 28 minutes in a favorable matchup where he's going to be able to take threes and shoot whenever there's an opening against that hybrid zone, I think he makes a very sneaky value option overall. And then the freshman Khalil Ware, pretty decent fantasy point per minute player, but seems to be stuck at 10 to 12 minutes. So can't really use him in anything besides large field throwaway lineups at the 4-1 price tag. Now, Keon Brooks, it's going to be tough to get there. He's almost 9K. He had an absolutely atrocious game against the Cougars, and it was because of fouls. But you see, he was able to still manage 32 minutes. They played him with the foul issues, but he played a lot more passive than usually. I do think we see him get back into the 30 fantasy point range. How much more over 30 really depends. I think the 8-8 price is a little bit too high overall for my liking, even though he is the obvious star of the team. Still have PJ Fuller and Jamal Bay as values. Bay at 4.3, Fuller at 3.9. So you can use one of those guys because minutes-wise, they're going to be asked to play a lot more, even with Cole Bajema back, Noah Williams, Keon Menafield. We just have a large guard contingent. We saw Menafield struggle last game because of the lack of minutes. He was at 24 instead of 30 plus we're accustomed to. Bajema played just the 17, and it's really become a shared backcourt. So none of them are really that strong of plays, but you can go down to the 4.3 or 3.9 for Fuller Bay and get some savings there instead. Noah Williams at 4.8 and Keon Menafield at 5.9 are both just kind of mediocre plays, but it wouldn't surprise me to see them absolutely melt at lower ownership because of the high usage, especially for Keon Menafield, who has one of the highest usage rates or usage shot rate combinations on the team, especially earlier on. He's kind of leveled off since, but earlier on in the season, he was having usage rates, of damn near 30%. I think that you want to target someone from the Huskies overall. If I'm on Dante, maybe I can get away from them because it is a relatively bad spot against Oregon, but something about the Oregon matchup that the Huskies tend to get up for. So if I had to choose one, I would take the easy way out by playing a Bay or a Fuller. I lean a little bit more towards Bay, but otherwise GPP shots for Menafield, Bajema, guys like that. And we could still see the other freshman, Corin Johnson, who showed flashes earlier in the season, start to see his minutes creep up. The last week or two of the season, he's played right around 10 minutes, which isn't enough. But we have seen him play 30, 25 to 30 minutes in other games and produce quite well when those happen. So, and Corin should be playing 30 minutes a game. I know we have a lot of guards, but he should be playing a lot more. All right, that is the slate, everyone. Let's get into core. My contacts are letting me. This is a less obvious core than it was yesterday, and I know Cario let us down, but that was a Mike White issue, as I mentioned earlier. Core play number 1 is from Xavier. It's a 1A, 1B situation. It's either Jack Nungy or Colby Jones. You could theoretically play both, but one of them, core play number 2, Justin Mutz or Grant Basile. Again, you could theoretically play both of them, but one or the other there. I'm taking one of those Xavier guys, and I'm taking one of those Virginia Tech guys, and I'm placing them in just about every lineup that I make. And then the third member of the core, which we typically like it to be a cheapie, right? Just so we can't just put the highest price guys in every single lineup. I think right now I'll go with Tobe Awaka as my third core member in value at 3.7 from Tennessee. I know it's a tough spot against Bama, but there's injuries looming. If those injuries break right in that Phillips is out, then I think Tobe Awaka pays off that 3.7 price even against a tough Alabama squad. All right, that is it. We did it. The DFS slate is covered. Let's look at PrizePicks real quick, and then we'll head on out of here and be back Friday night. This slate's going to take some skill. I love these kind of slates. It takes a little bit of puzzle building to really figure it out, but I think we can absolutely knock the doors off of this one. All right, the board is a little more robust at this hour than it was last night, so we have plenty of options to look through. The first one that semi stands out to me is PJ Hall They're sitting there at 27.8 fantasy points. I like him for 30 minimum here against Florida State. They also have his PRA sitting around 22.5, which is definitely playable in my eyes overall for what I expect Hall and even Hunter Tyson to do. Justin Mutz has paid off the over 25.5 PRA a lot this year, especially lately. His fantasy totals sitting around 31.8, which I'm still comfortable with, especially since he gets blocks and steals. So either one of those, over 25.5 PRA or over 31.8 fantasy points for Justin Mutz. Very, very confident in what he brings to the table. And then right now for Cincinnati, Landers Nolly is playing incredible basketball. Seeing him turn into the high usage guy that he was all the way back in his freshman year, going against a soft ECU team. I love his fantasy total, which is 29.7 fantasy points. Over that, that's the Jarkel number. Jarkel Joyner was 29.8 today. I don't see Nolly putting up 50, but I like him to put up a 35 to 40 number here, which he's been doing pretty consistently for the Cincinnati Bearcats, especially. So those are my 3 prize picks. I will have more loaded into the tracker. As I mentioned, we'll be back Friday night, midnight EST, 9 p.m. PST, to talk over the big Saturday slate. Appreciate your guys' continued support on the show and in our content. We pride ourselves on giving you guys the best information possible. If you're not a member already, get over to ftndaily.com or ftnbets.com. Sign up with my code DUB for 20% off. Good for your first month, or if you pay outright for the full year, you'll get the bulk discount off of that rate as well. Make sure you guys are in the Discord tomorrow. There is going to be plenty of injury news to track, lots of strategy talk going on. Let's make lots of money. Let's get the seat. Let's bink another tournament. And I'll see you guys on Friday. Let's make it happen. See ya.